Alrighty. Hello and welcome everybody to our Skills Kickstart session today on Fusion Lite. Our presenter today is going to be Jossie, and we are going to get started here in just a moment, give some people some more time to get logged in, get settled. So with that being said, we are going to start here in about 30 seconds, give people time to get in here. So awesome. And it does look like we're getting a pretty big crowd, so we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who did just join, this is our Skills Kickstart session on Fusion Lite with our presenter Jossie. We will have quite a bit of people in here, so please make sure that you put in your questions in the Q&A in the chat and we'd be happy to get to them. Again, do remember that there is quite a bit of people, so if we don't get to them, we will go ahead and reach out to you at the end if we don't get to those questions during the webinar. With that being said, Jossie, let's go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Alex. Welcome, everybody, to our first rendition of Fusion Lite. My name is Jocelyn Ironcloud. I'm a customer enablement specialist here at Encompass. I've been here for a little over 2.5 years. I spent my good first chunk of time here at Encompass on our support team, specifically working with our CRM products. So I spent a lot of time in Fusion, got to know it pretty well. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it today. So before we jump in, there's a few levels of Fusion that we offer here at Encompass. A couple of them are free webinars like this that we're doing today, and then there's a couple that are not. So let's cover those really quickly. Our first level is this kind of intro level, and this is where we focus on our report library in the quick edit panel in the Fusion view screen. Okay. Our next level is level 1. This is the first level that comes with a certification. And this level really focuses on deep diving into each element of actually building a Fusion report from scratch. Level 2 is also a certification, but we focus more on those advanced concepts like expressions, functions, base reports, variables, all that good stuff. But today, we're going to be kind of a step in between our intro level and our level 1 to kind of get you prepared, understand some of the concepts more before you get into that level 1 certification. Okay. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a review of some of the Fusion features. If you attended our Fusion for Business users, we talked a little bit about these, but really didn't deep dive into them. So we're going to talk more about our group bys, our values and aggregates. We'll touch on saved expressions and then filters as well. We're going to then go into taking a look at a report that my manager has sent me that she wants some changes made to. And then if we have some time, we'll save some time at the end for questions. All right. We're going to start by defining some of our main Fusion terms. And our first one is going to be joins. So joins in Fusion are a link between data sets with a common field or identifier on both. So in other words, table 1 is related to table 2 because these two fields match on each table. Or the invoices table matches the customers table because the customer ID field matches on both. Now, before I move on from joins, I do want to say that we're not going to go too much into joins today because I could spend this entire hour talking about joins alone. We do that in Fusion 1. We really deep dive into them. And if you do joins incorrectly, it can have really detrimental effects on your report. So we're not going to do too much with them today, just for the sake of you learning them correctly and being able to use them correctly in Fusion 1. Next up is our group bys. Group bys are how we systematically organize our data from least specific to most specific in our report. You'll see these as the parent, child, and detail in that Fusion edit screen. Next is our values. Values are going to take a bunch of different various data points and combine them all together into one single value. So this could be something like taking the count of how many records you have. It could be taking the sum of the cases sold last month. So taking all of those individual invoice transactions, adding them all up together to give you one output, the sum. Next up is expressions. These are a little bit more advanced logic that we get into more in Fusion 2, but they allow you to use some SQL functionality to create some more advanced logic in your reports. And they can be used pretty much anywhere in Fusion. We'll see here in just a second the different places that you can use them. And then last, we have our filters. Just like in Ralston and Compass, filters restrict data. So just like on a table, if you're filtering on a column, you're restricting the data that comes back in that column. Same kind of concept in Fusion. When you're adding a filter to your Fusion report, you're restricting the data that comes back into the report. So let's look at where these are here on the actual Fusion edit screen. So I just have a basic sales report here. And starting at the top, we've got our joins in yellow in this top section here labeled tables. And we've got 3 tables joined into our report here. And from just here, we can kind of tell how these are joined together. So I can see my very first table here, or my base table, is the invoice trans report table. And then I have 2 other tables joined in. I can see that this second one here, the products table, is joined to our reference table invoice trans. And then my field and reference field are going to be that common identifier. So I can see product ID from the products table is matched to the product ID field on the invoice trans table. So we're joining those 2 together on that product ID field. Now this last one here, the customers table, actually has an expression join. So we talked about how expressions can be used pretty much anywhere in Fusion. And this is one of those places. We can do some kind of advanced joining of tables. I can't open this up here because it's a screenshot to show you. But what's likely happening here is we're matching on either more than one field, or we are filtering out data at the join level. There's kind of 2 reasons why you would want to do this. If I could get duplicates because of this join, I could join on 2 fields to make it more specific. Or if I know that I only want customers from a certain location, no matter what, never want to change it, I could filter that out at the join level. Next up is our group bys. Our group bys are in these green boxes here, and you'll see there's 2 of them. So we've got that parent, child, and detail that we talked about. And then our columns over here on the right is a special type of group by that we'll talk about more here in just a little bit. Our aggregates, also known as our values, is this red section down here underneath the columns. These are going to be all those kind of numeric type values where we have an aggregate applied to them. And we'll talk more about what that means here in a little bit. And then all the way down at the bottom of our report is our filters in this kind of blue color here. We've got a few different types of filters. Our first one here is a period filter. I can tell by this little label here that says period. So this is just picking a period of whatever time frame I'm looking at. So in this one specifically, we're looking at last month. And I'm restricting the data in my report to this period. Got a couple others down here that are just using some basic table fields. So kind of similar to filtering on a table. So I've got a customer account type filter that is equal to sale, a products filter that is equal to true, and then I've got a kind of a weird one down here at the bottom. So this num units filter is equal to nothing right now, but I can see this little FX symbol is blacked out, and that means it's using an expression. So in our orange boxes here, we got one here and one at the top. These are our expressions in the report. Like I said, they can be used pretty much anywhere. So we can use them in filters, we can use them in values, we can use them in joins, even in group bys, pretty much anywhere. This one's not doing much right now, but this would mean that it's an expression. When this little FX symbol is blacked out, like it is here, it's using an expression. All right. Now let's actually go and talk about what these are. So we're going to start with our group bys. And again, group bys are how we organize our report, and there's actually 2 types of them. Our first one are the ones that pretty much everyone is familiar with, is that parent, child, and detail. And what these do is they group your data into rows. So the rows on your report that you're seeing are because of your parent, child, and detail. Again, these are going to group our data from least specific to most specific, or least granular to most granular. So if we look at our example here, we have supplier in the parent and brand in the child. We know that suppliers can have many, many, many brands. So brand is the more granular piece of data. So we go from, again, least specific to most specific, or least granular to most granular. The nice thing about these parent, child, and detail is that they give you multiple sets of totals. So when we look at our values here in a minute, for each group by that you have, you're going to get a different set of totals. So I'll get a total of my values that I have selected for my supplier and also for my brand. So I get kind of a breakout of how those are coming together. I put a note in here that we're optimized for data in rows, and that's true for all of Encompass, not necessarily just Fusion. You'll notice when you're on tables in Encompass, you're seeing many, many, many rows of data, right? And maybe a few columns. We are optimized for data in rows. It's better for reporting. It's better for our data warehouse, all the good things. Again, optimized for data in rows. That's why we give you all of these options here, the many different fields that you can add, different parent, child, and detail. Whereas with our columns, we only see one. So columns are a special type of group by, and you can, again, only use one of them in a report. And they essentially flip your parent, child, and detail from rows to columns. So instead of having rows and rows of data, you're getting a column. And what these do is they're going to break out your values that you have selected. So I can see down here, I have two values, num units and product. And my column is set to year. So depending on the time frame that I'm looking at in this report, we'll say we're looking at the last 2 years. I'm going to get two columns for each one of my values, one for 2024 and one for 2025. So I'll see a total of num units for 2024 and 2025, and a product count for 2024 and 2025. So I'm getting that breakout a little bit easier to kind of see what's going on in my report. Now, if you are getting more into Fusion 2 type of topics, something to know is that you can't use columns in a child or base report. We're not going to talk much about those today, but it's just something to know that if you're building a base report to be used in something else, you can't have a column in there, it won't work. And if you are familiar with Excel or spreadsheets, these columns are kind of similar, not exactly the same, but similar to pivot tables, if that kind of helps you conceptualize a little bit better what they're doing. All right, here's a little example of our parent, child, and detail to kind of understand how this breaks out. So my example here is a chain, customer, and invoice group by. So at the top, we've got our chain. We know that chains can have many customers. So we break down underneath in our child, the customer, and then we know customers have many, many, many invoices. So the most granular piece of information here is invoice in our detail. All right. We're going to jump into values next. And a good way to remember is what values do is that they evaluate your group bys. Seems silly, but it does help. So for every value that you have, so here in this one, I've just got num units. I will get a num units total for each of my group bys. So I'm evaluating my group bys for this num units value. Okay. Anytime that you have a value in your report, you need to have an aggregate. This can either be by selecting one from this drop-down menu to the right, or you can use aggregates in expressions as well. We're not going to talk much about that today again, but know that they have to be in one or the other, never both, one or the other. We have a few different options here of aggregates. We have sum, average, count, max, min, and any. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory, like sum is going to be adding up all of the different num units into one sum. Average is going to be adding up all of the num units and taking the average of all of those. Count will just take a literal count of how many records you have. So in this case, it would be how many invoice transactions there are that meet the criteria. Max would be the highest number of num units. Min would be the lowest number of num units. And then any is a little bit of a weird one. So any isn't necessarily like any of our other ones in here, but you would use any when there's only ever going to be one possible result. So this would be like if I'm looking at, let's say, on-floor inventory, and I'm only looking at one location. I know there's only going to be one on-floor inventory per product, so I'm only going to have one option anyway. I can just choose any. The thing to know about any is if there's going to be more than one result, Fusion will pick at random, which isn't super helpful. So pick the aggregate that makes the most sense if there's going to be more than one option. Otherwise, if there's only ever going to be one, any is just fine. We'll see an example of this here in a little bit when we take a look at our report to kind of help make that make a little more sense, because any is a little ambiguous. All right. Next up is our filters. We have many different types of filters in Encompass. In Fusion, these should look pretty similar to our comparison filters if you work with comparison much. And then we have a couple extra more advanced ones that are not in comparison. So starting out with our date and period filters, these limit to a specific time frame or date range, just like you would use in comparison. They're pretty similar. We have our regular filters, our table filters. These are ones like you see throughout Encompass, like when you're filtering on a column in a table, or you're choosing any of those filters at the bottom in comparison. They work pretty much the same way. Our next two are those more kind of special filters that you only see in Fusion. And first is the filter expressions that we saw a little bit of here just a minute ago when we were looking at that screenshot. But these are a special type of filter that you can use expressions in, so that SQL language to do kind of a more advanced filter. And then our variables, which we definitely won't cover today because those are very much Fusion 2 topic. But just so you know what they are when you see them, they really act as a placeholder in your report. They do nothing on their own. They have to be brought into your report in some other way to have any sort of functionality. They are a little complex. We definitely won't talk about them today, but just so you know what they are. All right. The last thing we're going to talk about before we jump into looking at a report is saved expressions. If we have time at the end here, I'll show you how we can use these. But essentially what these are is if you've been in Encompass for a while, you probably know we used to have a dashboard called the expression library. It was a dashboard that had many different SQL expressions on there that had the syntax that you could copy and then go back to your report and paste it into an expression. We actually got rid of that dashboard because we pulled it right into Fusion right there for you, so you don't have to go to a different dashboard, bring it back and paste it into your report. So this is really handy. When you're in the expression builder, on the left-hand side in the function section, there's a saved expressions section right at the very top. And this is going to have a bunch of different Encompass created expressions that were either on that expression library or ones that we know that are the most commonly used. So we have everything from dollar volume to gross, even gallons in here, margin, stop count down here, lots of different ones for you to choose from. And we've made them really easy with these little eye icons to the left. You can pop them open and see some notes that we've written in there about them. And then you can actually see the syntax here as well as how that's being calculated. Now, the nice thing about these is you don't have to copy and paste this in that little box there. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is click on whichever one you want here. It's going to paste it in the box for you, and that's all you have to do. Super easy. Now, you'll notice I say that we have custom expressions too. So the nice thing is once you really get into writing your own expressions, if you write one that you really like, you want to be able to use it in other reports without having to copy and paste it, you can write out your expression in here. And we have this save expression button at the top. That will let you name it, and it's going to pop it right into the save expressions list here for you. This won't show up for everyone. It's only going to show up for you, but it is really nice. It shows up there in your list so you can use it in your other reports. All right, so now that we know how everything works, what do you actually need to be able to build or edit a report? First of all, you need the permission, right? You need the Fusion Edit permission to be able to access that Fusion Edit screen. You need some sort of data set. So that's going to be your joins, your tables, the reports that you join in, whatever kind of data set you're using. You have to have some sort of data set to be able to pull information from. And you need a group by. The minimum for creating a Fusion report is at least one parent group by. You can run a report all day long with just one group by. Not going to do much for you, but you can run it. You just have to have that one. I'm going to pause for a second here to see if we have any questions before we jump into our report.
I haven't seen any questions come through, but we can give it another minute if you'd like.
I'll start talking about our report here, and if you see any come in, Alex, let me know.
Sounds great.
All right. So I got this email from my boss. I'm sure you have all seen something like this from either your supervisor or your coworker, where they've sent you some sort of Fusion report and said, hey, I need help editing this. Can you do this? Especially once you start getting really familiar with Fusion and people know that, they're going to start coming to you. So this is one that I've received. My manager said, I found this report that was passed down by the previous warehouse manager. Can you help me add more information to the report to help better understand our picker cuts? So she sent me a report here. And then this is a list of things that she wants. So she wants what invoice and load sheet it was for, who the sales rep was, who the delivery rep was, what was the on-floor inventory of the cut product, show all the picker cuts from yesterday, and only for our Sterling location. This is a lot of information that she wants added. So to just start us off, let's just go look at the report to see what we're working with. All right, I'm gonna zoom in here a little so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, so it looks like we've got a few different sections of data here. The easiest way for me to understand kind of how this report is being grouped is to collapse everything and open them one by one. So I'm going to collapse everything by clicking this arrow in the very top section here. And this is going to help me understand my group bys. So I can see my very first row here is a date, and I've got that date label here. It looks like today's date. And then I've got my two columns over here on the right, which are my values. Great. I'm going to pop this open to see my next grouping, which would be my child grouping. And I can see some names here. And the names are my pickers. So I've got all of my different pickers here. And then I see that same total for my values. Okay. I'm going to open up one of the pickers here. And this is my last grouping, my detail. And I've got two columns, extra columns here. So I've got this first one that looks like a customer. So I've got customer name and name. And then this column to the right is a product. So I can see kind of how my report is being broken out here. Okay. I'm going to jump into our Fusion Edit screen to just see that's those same things that we just saw, but on the edit screen. So I'm going to zoom out just a little. All right. So at the top, we see all of our joins here. There are quite a few tables in here already, which is great because I'm not doing any table joining today. So we've got a lot to work with. And then down to our group bys, we see that same grouping we were just looking at by collapsing all of those. So that very top level, the date, our second level in the child, our picker. And then in that third bottom level, the detail, we have the customer number name and our product number name. Over on the right, where we had those two value columns, I can see that ordered value, which is using the ordered field from the invoice trans report table, and the invoiced value, which is using the num units field from the invoice trans report table. You'll notice this one has a little bit of a different name than the actual field because I can name this whatever I want. It doesn't matter. This is just an alias. So you can name these whatever makes the most sense for you if you don't want it to be called num units. Okay. So what these values are showing me is what the customer actually ordered and what we actually invoiced to them. So what did we actually deliver to them and sell to them? Coming down to the bottom here, let's take a look at our filters. So we can see we have a period filter already applied. That's looking at today. And then we have two other filters down here at the bottom. One is a reason filter. So we're looking at the reasons table for the reason field. And we want that field to equal pick or cut. We know this is a pick or cut report. That makes the most sense. They're picking a reason when they cut that product, and they're picking that pick or cut reason. This other filter here we can see is an expression filter. We see that little FX blacked out here. We can see that whatever is selected in here is set to greater than 0. And if I pop this open here by clicking this little expand icon, I can see what's being calculated. So I can see we're taking the difference between the amount ordered minus num units. So how much did they order? How much did we actually deliver? And we want that to be greater than 0. Again, we're looking at a pick or cut report. We want to see things that were actually cut, not every single thing on this report. So this is limiting our report to just things where there was a cut. Okay. So now that we know what we're working with, let's jump back to our list here. And I wrote this out a little bit easier for us so we kind of know what we're working with. So I find the easiest way to start when you're editing a report is to start with your filters. Because when you're starting to add in a lot of different group bys and values and columns, you're adding more and more data to your report that you're not actually going to need all of that in the end. If you add your filters first, you're limiting it down to only the data you need, and then you can continue adding. It's going to help optimize your report, make it run a little bit faster. So I prefer to start with filters. So we know the things we need to restrict in our report is to see only picker cuts from yesterday. And we only want to see for our Sterling location. So we need 2 filters. Let's jump back into our report here. And we know we already have a period filter here. Our period filter is set to today. This one's a super easy fix. All I have to do is change it from today to yesterday. Done, easy. Our next one is a little bit more complicated because we don't have a filter here already that's filtering to location. So we need to add one. So all we do, click the little plus sign here next to filters. That's going to bring us a new field. And the easiest way to do this is just start searching for keywords. So I'm going to type in location. I've got a lot of options here to choose from. And the easiest way to do this when you're not sure which one to pick is to look for the one that matches the table. So I know I'm looking for location. I actually have a locations table in here. So I'm going to search for the locations dash location field. When in doubt, choose the one that has the actual table. All right. So we're going to say the location equals Sterling. Okay, so now we have that other filter in here, which is going to restrict the data that comes into our report for only our Sterling warehouse. All right, we've knocked out 2 of those already. So we've added in our 2 filters. Our report should already look different. So let's go ahead and run it and just see how that changed. Okay, it looks like it took a lot of data out of here already. I actually only have 1 picker that shows up. I can see it's now looking at yesterday's date instead of today. And I have way less cuts in here. This is a pretty small warehouse location, so this makes sense. But there's a lot more information I want to know about these. Let's jump back into our edit screen. And then I'm going to come look at our other options here, our other requirements. So our next thing she wants us to add is what invoice and load sheet the cut product was for. Okay. Now, the easiest way to figure out where this best fits in your report is to actually look at the data. So if I'm looking at my report here and I'm going to be adding in a load sheet and an invoice, I have to figure out where it makes the most sense to be grouped. So if I'm looking at my highest level, grouping it with the date doesn't necessarily make sense. If I have many pickers and many different product customer combinations underneath this date, it's going to pick one at random, and that doesn't really help me. Same thing at the next level. If I put the load sheet and the invoice in this row with the picker, that's not going to tell me which customer or product it was for, just who did it, right? Again, because there's more than one under here, that doesn't even tell me which product it was for. So it makes the most sense in this case for us to put the invoice and the load sheet at this lowest, most granular level with the actual customer and product that was cut. Okay. So that means it's going to go down in this detail section with our customer and product. We don't have any extra fields here, so we need to add them in. We do that same thing like with the filters. We're just going to click this plus sign, and I'm going to add 2 fields. And just like with our filter, we're going to search for keywords. So the first one was our invoice. What invoice was this cut for? So if I search for keyword invoice, I get a ton of options again. So I can start looking a little bit further. I could do something like invoice ID, less options there. But I also know that Fusion has some handy functionality that puts links in here. So I can search for invoice link. I get 1 option. And this is going to let me go straight to the invoice to see that invoice that the cut product was for. Pretty handy. So I'm going to use that one. Our next one was a load sheet. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to search load sheet. Again, I've got a lot of options here. I could do something like load sheet ID. And I believe it's 2 words. There we go. And I've got a few different options here. In this case, it doesn't necessarily matter because I'm looking at an ID. I'm going to get the same thing from any of these. But when in doubt, use the one from the table. So I've got the load sheet ID from the load sheets table. Okay, now if I run my report, I should have 2 extra columns in that lowest level grouping. So I've still got my 1 date, my 1 picker, and then I've now got 4 columns in this detail section. So I've got the customer, the product, the invoice, and then the load sheet ID. Ironically, these are both from the same invoice, but I have that invoice link here, so I can just pop right on over to that invoice, and I can see that customer's invoice that this product was cut for. And looking at the bottom here, I see those 2 products that were cut. Okay. Now, we've added that invoice and load sheet. Next up, we need to add who was the sales rep for this invoice and who is supposed to deliver it. Okay. Using that kind of same logic we used for the invoice and load sheet, we want to figure out where it makes the most sense in our report. So again, the sales rep and delivery rep doesn't make the most sense on the date because I can have many different customers and products under here, right? Same thing with the picker. knowing who the delivery rep and sales rep was at this level doesn't make sense because I know I can have many different results under each picker. So again, we're going at that most granular level to see specifically for this customer and this product, this invoice and this load sheet, who was the sales rep and who was supposed to deliver it. Okay. So we're going to go back into that Fusion Edit screen and do the same thing again. We're going to add in 2 detail fields and we're going to search for those keywords again. So I'm going to search for salesman. Got a lot of options here again, and I want to see their name, not necessarily like their user ID or their username. I want to see their actual name. So let's try salesman name, and I only get 1. So it looks like this salesman name field is coming from the assigned users table. So I'm getting who the assigned sales rep is. Now let's say instead of the assigned salesman, I want to see the actual salesman, right? I can instead look at actual, and here I have a salesman actual instead. So this really depends on what you want to see. Do you want to see who truly sold that product, or do you want to see who is assigned to that customer? I just want to see who's assigned to them, so I'm going to choose this salesman name. Next up is our delivery rep. So we're going to do the same thing again. I'm going to type in deliveryman. I only have a few options here, and I have that deliveryman name again from that assigned users table. I'm going to use that one too. All right. So now when I run my report, I should have 2 additional columns in that lowest level grouping. That's going to give me more information. Okay. So for this customer, this product, on this invoice and load sheet, the assigned salesman is Robbie Noor, and the person delivering this invoice is Sam. I can double check that by looking at our invoice here. If I go up and go to the data tab, I should see salesman is Robbie and our deliveryman is Sam. So we can double check that's coming in correctly. Okay. Now we've added almost everything here. We have a filter for yesterday. We're looking only at our Sterling location. We added in those 4 extra columns into our detail section for invoice, load sheet, sales rep, and delivery rep. Our last request on here is to add an on-floor inventory of the cut product. So this one's a little bit different than our last one. So let's take a look at our report to see where it makes the most sense. Okay. So again, we're not going to want to put our on-floor inventory with a date because that really doesn't tell us much. Having on-floor inventory next to a picker doesn't tell us what it's for. But having it in this most granular level tells us the on-floor inventory for each specific product in each row. So again, it's going to make the most sense for us to be looking at this product. However, I also have a second option here. Instead of putting it in my group by, I can also put that on-floor inventory in my values. It's really going to depend in this case where you want that data to show up. For me, it makes the most sense to see what was ordered, what was invoiced, and then what we actually have in inventory all together in one section. You could, in theory, in this case, put it in your group buys in this lowest level, but there's a reason we can do both in this instance. So let's talk about it. If I go over to our inventory table, and I'm actually going to use the product that was cut from this invoice. So let's do 1377. Okay, I can see that this product alone has 3 results. And all the way over on the right, there's an on-floor inventory column, and there's a value for each one. The three results that we're getting are for our warehouse locations. So I've got a Dodge City, a Gehring, and a Sterling, and I see the on-floor inventory for each one of them. I know in our report, we're filtering to only the Sterling location. So if I do that same thing here on the table, I filter to only Sterling, we only get one result. Because we're only getting that one result, we can use it pretty much anywhere in our report. Group bys or values. If I was wanting to pull in all of my locations, I would need to tell Fusion somehow which one of these on-floor inventories I want, or if I want to aggregate them together and get a total of some sort. So if I'm looking at all of my locations, let's say maybe I want the sum of all of them. I want to see total from all of my warehouses, how much on-floor inventory we have. That would need to go in my values because I have to be able to add that sum aggregate to add them all up together. Remember, we're taking the different results from wherever they are. So in this case, the three results from our inventory table, adding them all up together to get one result. But because we only have the one, we could do it in both. This is simply just my preference in this case, but because I want them to be grouped together with my ordered and my invoiced, I'm going to put them in my values. So we're going to do the same thing again. I know from the inventory table that this field is called the on-floor inventory field. So I'm going to search for that field here in this value field box. I'm going to search for on-floor inventory. Here it is. Perfect. And we know that that aggregate has to be applied. In this case, I know I only have that one result for the Sterling location. So I don't need a sum of anything. There's nothing to add up. There's nothing to take an average of because there's only one. A count would just show me one, which isn't helpful. And max and min don't help me much because there's only one. So in this case, I can leave this as any, meaning it's going to pick it at random, but there's only one for it to pick from, so that's fine. Okay. Let's run our report and let's make sure that these are working like they should. So I have this extra column on the right here for on-floor inventory. It looks like for this first product, I have 155 of on-floor inventory, and the second one I have 105. This is going to kind of help me understand why these cuts were happening. And in this case, it doesn't really help me understand. So this would be a reason for me to go to this picker, Cody, and say, hey, I saw you cut these two products. We have a lot of inventory of it. What happened? Right? If there was a 0 here in the on-floor inventory, that tells me pretty quickly why it was cut. But we can double check this number here too. So let's take a look at this 1377 product again. Looks like we have 155 on-floor inventory. We're looking at, excuse me, just the Sterling warehouse location. And then all the way over on the right, it actually looks like we have 104. So let's find out what's going on here. 1377. I bet what happened is because we're looking at yesterday, we actually have more inventory. So a little bit of a flaw in looking at this is because we're looking at yesterday's picks, our inventory is obviously going to be a little bit different today, but it still gives us a pretty good idea of where we're at with our inventory. If it was 0 yesterday, still 0 today, pretty good reason why it's cut, right? But we know if there's 155 and still 104 here, there's more of the story why it was cut, right? Now that we've added everything to the report, it's ready for my manager, but she can't actually see this right now. We haven't saved it. It's not in her reports. She doesn't know that it's been created, right? So we need to save this report and then figure out how to send it to her. So at the top, I'm going to click this Save as New Report. I'm going to update the name to make a little bit more sense for what we're looking at. So we're looking at picker cuts yesterday. I have a couple options of how I can save this report to who it belongs to. So I could leave it as myself and send it to her, but if she wants to make any changes, that's not super helpful. So I can actually save it under her, and it's going to go right to her saved reports dashboard. So I'm going to hit save. Now that it's in her dashboard, that's great, but she doesn't know it's there, right? It doesn't send her any sort of alert, doesn't tell her that there's something new there. So instead, I'm going to share this with her as well so she knows that it's done. So at the top now that I've saved, I have this little icon to share the report. It's going to give me a couple different options to send it as email, as a text message. I can copy even a link here. I'm just going to email it to her. I can search for who I want to send it to here. Here's my boss. I can CC and BCC people here. It's already put in the name of the report in the subject, and I can even put in a message here. Here's the report, if I can spell, you requested. And then I just hit send. That's going to send off to her email, give her a link to it, and now she can go take a look at what we created. Okay. Now, one thing we didn't talk about is if you've been to that Fusion for Business users training, we talked a lot about this side panel here. I didn't really add anything in there that's going to help her make changes to the report when she has it. So one thing that she might want is to be able to change around the filters here. And really the only one that she has an option to change is the date and the reason. Reason's not really going to be changed much if we're looking at picker cuts. This isn't super helpful. But what might be helpful is that location filter. I don't see it in my options here. So we have to actually go back into this edit screen and come down to the bottom here. Here's my location filter. And to make it show up on that screen, I need to pin it. So we can see our reason filter here that was showing up. It has this little checkbox under the pin column. If we do the same thing for our location, that should now show up in our side panel where I can switch between locations. So if I want to see one for this location, they don't have any for yesterday. We'll try this one instead. Perfect. So now I can see my Dodge City location instead. They're much bigger. And I can see the different cuts that happened at that specific warehouse. You can see here, we've got lots of different products that have that zero inventory like we would usually expect with those cuts, right? So then I can switch between those. All right, I want to pause for questions if we have any. And if we have a little time, I'll show you those saved expressions.
Yeah, there hasn't been any questions that have come up yet.
Amazing. All right. Then, since we have a couple minutes here, I want to show you those saved expressions. We didn't use them in this report because we didn't really have any that she wanted. But if I wanted to use them, again, I can use expressions pretty much anywhere. Those saved expressions work best in the values because most of them have some sort of aggregate on them, which can really only be used in your values. So I'm going to add another field here. To open up that expression builder, I need to make this into an expression. So this little FX symbol, when you click on it, it's going to format that into an expression instead. And then I can click this little expand icon to open up our expression builder. On the left, here's that function section, and our saved expressions are always going to be right at the top. And I've got a bunch of different ones in here that I can choose from. I've even got some custom ones in here that I created. And we can choose whatever makes the most sense for our report. There's really nothing that's going to make sense for this report. We can pretend that there's one. We'll choose something like, we'll try stop count. Sure. This is going to take count of the number of stops. Not going to be the most helpful in this report, but that's okay. So it's going to paste that syntax right there in that box for us. We don't have to change anything. These tables are already in our report, which is great. We don't have to do anything. We can see that at the very beginning here, this count, this is actually our aggregate. So our aggregate is right here in the actual expression. And if we think back I said we need to have an aggregate, but we can't have it in both places in the expression and the dropdown. So anytime that you're adding these saved expressions and you see the aggregate here in the actual expression, which usually it is, you'll need to remove it from the dropdown. So we'll change it to this little blank option. If I didn't do that, I'm going to get an error. It's going to give me this really crazy looking error, and it's going to say aggregate functions cannot be nested. And that just means we have it set in both places, and Fusion doesn't like that. So if we remove this and I create the report, I should no longer get that error, and now I have that extra column for our expression. This is just a stop count. Each customer is only going to have one stop, so it's always going to say one, but that is how you would use those. Any other questions that came in, Alex?
Yes, we did have a question come in. So when saving a report, if you don't select a role, is the report
Mhm.
only going to be visible by the report owner?
Um, no. So let me click on this again. So these role view permissions, without them, anybody that you share that report with, or has access to like the reports table and has the Fusion view permission can look at that report. Okay. These role view permissions further restrict. So if I put on, say, the employee restricted permission, only people who have the user type of employee restricted can see this report. So it further limits. Okay. Without them, anyone who has the permission to view Fusion reports can see it. This gets into a little bit more of advanced kind of topics that we talk about in Fusion 1, but there are other ways to limit that as well using filters. We're not going to go into it today because I could talk forever, but you can set these user types on filters that limit certain data to what they see. So if there are certain things you want them to see on the report, um, maybe you don't want them to be like completely limited from the report, but there's only certain data you want them to see. You can limit that on the report as well in these filters. Whole nother topic for Fusion 1, but it's possible.
Perfect. And we did get another question that was kind of in that same realm, and it sounds like you did
Yeah,
answer that. So if you wanted more of that, please let us know and we'd be happy to answer that.
perfect.
But other than that, right now I'm not seeing any more come in. We will give it a few more minutes. And while we do wait for some questions to come in, I'm just going to kind of announce a few announcements. This recording will be uploaded in the recording archive by the end of the day. So if you want to go back, rewatch it, see Jossie and I's lovely faces, you can go and watch it again in there. We do have a bunch more Skills Kickstarts coming up, so if you want to see what's happening, go to that e-learning dashboard and take a look as well. And after this webinar, there is a survey that will be sent out, and we really do appreciate your feedback. So if you do have a moment, please take that. If you don't have a sec right now, it will be emailed to you as well. So please keep that in mind. We really do appreciate that feedback. Okay, and it looks like we did get one more question, Jossie.
Yeah,
Can we easily add graphics to reports, or is that going to be more on a higher level skill or training?
that's a great question. So we do talk about this a little bit more in that Fusion for business users, and there is a recording of that in a recording archive that I talk more in depth about it. But it's super easy to add graphics here. So I assuming we're talking about graphs. And I can do that right from this the report view screen. So in that left-hand side, there's that graph section. And I'm going to get a bunch of different options to choose from here, whichever makes the most sense for my report. There's not really a graph that makes the most sense for this report, but if I'll just pick a random one here, we'll do a number card because I think they're fun. Um, you can put your little visuals at the top here. So number card is a cool one. We could do something like a line chart. Again, doesn't make super sense for this report, but yeah, lots of options that you can choose from here. They've all got their own kind of settings that you can set, different max and min values, how you want the data displayed. They're really fancy. Hopefully that answers your question.
Awesome. And then one last question that we did get on or get that if you could just reference again, if you do not select that role when saving the report, what is the overall permission that allows users to see that report?
Yep, it's that Fusion View permission. So um, there's two Fusion permissions, Fusion View and Fusion Edit. Fusion Edit is going to let you get into this Fusion Edit screen here. Fusion View is going to let you view that report. So um, we talk about this a little bit in comparison. Our reporting systems are different in that they have different permissions built in. So comparison automatically respects your user permissions. So when your sales reps, delivery reps, whatever, view a comparison report, they're only going to see what they're allowed to see. Fusion does not do that. So Fusion does not have any built-in permissions. You have to manually put them in for what you want people to see. So without them, they're pretty open. So either using those role view permissions or figuring out how to use those user types to limit what people can see. So that's what this user type column is for. Whatever you select in these filters, you can limit it to whoever, what user type it is. So if it's customer, and this is like a customer filter, they'll only see their own information, right? So Fusion does not have that built in. You do have to add those yourself.
Okay. And is that permission a one that they can all see, just based off the roles and the table permissions?
Yep. So you'll just need to go to your roles table and take a look at the roles permissions set on your users. So if I go over to roles and we'll look at say like a sales rep, and if I do the subtables, roles permissions, I can see everything that's assigned to them here, and they actually don't have it. So let's actually try instead Fusion. Oh, you know what? It might not be Fusion View. Let me double check on the permission for you, and I will email you with what that is. It might be reporting something. Mm, I'll double check, and I will email you what that permission is.
Awesome. And I'm not seeing any other questions come in. There was another one, but I will go ahead and email you separately. So keep that in mind. But with that, I'm not seeing any other questions come in right away. So,
So thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate it.
alrighty. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.